My friend and I are still trying to process exactly what we saw the other day. We've talked it through countless times trying to logically figure out how this was possible. Hopefully someone on here can give us some thoughts and ideas as to what actually happened. So I recently purchased a small bass boat, and my first mate Legav and I have been super eager to explore the lake and its islands, as well as learn the fishing around it. We're new to Tennessee. Yesterday on the 4th of July, we decided to go fishing in this very secluded part of the lake we named No Man's Land. Because of the low-hanging bridge that prevents boaters from entering the section. My boat can make it underneath because of how small it is, but I've never seen another boat in there. We decided to go deeper into the cove than we've ever been before. As we're slowly trolling down the lake, the path before us splits into 3 forks, and I ask which fork we should take. Legav immediately says the middle one, so we continue straight as the water changes from a large lake to a narrow river-like path. This is where a chain of events happened in quick succession, and we've talked through it after the fact to try and recall the order of how this went down. First, we heard a weird vocal-like noise coming from the woods beyond the shoreline, and we both tensed up and felt very uneasy. "What was that?" Legav asked. "A dog," I said, as that was the first thing that came to mind. "I don't think that was a dog," Legav answered immediately. Then we saw a bird high above us perching on a branch, staring at us. "Maybe it was that bird," Legav said. "Yeah, maybe," I answered. I'm not sure when it got into my hand, but at some point I drew my pistol and held it down at my side. Legav held the fishing rod. We both had a very weird feeling as we drifted down the river, eyes glued to the bank. We came to a rotting pine tree that had fallen and was now half submerged in the water, sitting on the shoreline. Then it happened. We hear a very loud, heavy-footed animal running through the woods, getting closer to the water. At first I thought it was a deer, as it was almost prancing, but as it got closer and louder we both realized it was in fact not a deer. It was a very large, jet-black canine. My brain thought, oh, it must be a coyote, but this was much bigger, like a huge German shepherd. And it was fast, like a black shadow, leaping through the trees and quickly approaching the bank that we were floating across from. It didn't seem to have any texture and details though, almost like it was flat and blurry. We couldn't see fur, or its face and eyes, just the outline of its body and tall wolf-like ears. But it was obviously the body of a canine. Adrenaline starting rushing through us, and my brain raced thinking we were about to have to defend ourselves. It almost looked as if it was charging at us, but it was zigzagging and dodging through the trees toward the exact portion of shoreline we were floating past. We were scared, but the 15 feet of water between our boat and the shoreline gave us some confidence. It would have to swim out to us, and I didn't see that as likely. It continued its leaping through the woods and quickly reached our portion of the shoreline. In one majestic, fluid motion, it leaped off the shore and jumped into the water right under the half-submerged pine tree in front of us. Stomp, 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 splash. That was it. We held our breath as we waited to hear it swim or move toward us. Small ripples reached our boat from the splash. After the fact, Legav swears the splash should have been much bigger for a creature that size. "Watch for it to come back up," I whispered. I had never heard of canines being able to submerge themselves underwater, but here it was happening right in front of our eyes. We waited. Nothing. Silence. Just the subtle sound of the ripples it made slowly dissipating. We waited about 20 more seconds and still nothing. It was almost as if the entire forest had shut off. Silence. Our eyes were glued to the fallen pine tree it dove under. Maybe it's just standing in the water under the tree, Legov says. We get the courage to troll the boat a little closer to inspect the tree, but there's nothing. No sign of anything. At this point, we're in complete shock. We were stunned. It's gone. How could it be gone? How does something that big just vanish, especially a huge creature like that? After 30 more seconds of silence, Legov breaks it with, "You saw what I saw, right?" A shiver flashes down my spine. "All of it," I reply. "Really though, what the heck was that?" Legov said. I replied, "I think we saw a demon," and we both nervously laughed. We stay floating near the shoreline in shock for at least another 10 minutes, hoping for a sign that we weren't crazy. Legov scoured the waters looking to see if it would come up for air. It never did. How the hell could a big black wolf-like creature disappear into thin air, or water for that matter? Being skeptics, there has to be a logical explanation to what we saw, but we can't find one. If it had just splashed the water and gotten out again, then for one, we would have seen it walk away in whatever direction, and two, we would have heard it as anything putting weight on the leaves makes a loud noise. But it was just silence. The loudest of silences. We live in Middle Tennessee, if that helps at all. We're still a little shaken up by this. This is 100% true, we are not BSing you. Any insight would be much appreciated. Number 2. The Pit. It was about dawn when I was returning home by the usual route. After the night I had spent hunting and resting in the forest, I was tired and lethargic, but alert. I had to get to my workplace on time in the morning, so I chose a new route. A road shorter than the usual route, but one that was not marked on a map. I passed through the bushes and thorns. The dry branches of plants stick to my clothes and sometimes my skin, and the cold air burns my body. However, the thought of home and a hot cup of tea, and the fear of being late for work kept me going. In this sense, I was relieved, and I was thanking God that I had finally left the forest and was walking in a grassland where the only inhabitants were insects and small rodents. As the road became smoother and I realized that I was getting closer to my destination, which was the main road, I heard a voice. A sound that did not match the sound of crickets and morning birds, and I doubted that whatever its origin was, it was in its natural state. At first, the sound was quiet, and with long intervals, it could be heard from far away, and it was like the moaning of a painful and angry creature. Ignoring that sound, I walked in the right direction, but the sound got louder and louder with each step. I tried to find familiar words in that voice. Words like help, but all I could hear was nothing but an unintelligible moan and a series of sounds. When, against my will, I was so close to the sound that it deafened my ears, I decided to look for its source and relieve the creature that was moaning like that from its pain. I walked towards the sound, which was now loud and deafening, and finally, in the faint light of twilight, I saw an earthen pit under the ground. The sound was definitely coming from this pit. I put my things on the ground and entered the pit on all fours. The only equipment I had with me was a pocket knife and a pack of matches. I was walking in the pit on all fours and felt the slope of the ground downwards. As I went forward, the air got hotter and hotter and the sound got louder and louder. Suddenly I felt my hand land on something soft, and I knew it was a worm by the way it wiggled between my fingers. I felt sick and wanted to go back, but curiosity or perhaps pity for that creature made me continue my way. After a few minutes I felt very tired. The air inside the pit was hot and humid, and it was difficult for me to breathe. The soil was soft and smelled of decay. Worms, cockroaches, and spiders moved on my hands and were crushed under my hands and feet. The light at the beginning of the pit was no longer visible, and I did not know how many minutes or hours I had been moving. The pit was really narrow, and when I was on all fours, my back hit the roof of the pit. However, I felt that I could go further. For whatever creature it was, the pit was strangely the size of a full-grown human. I was moving forward into the pit, and the pit continued without any twists and turns. I was so used to the sound that it didn't bother me anymore. Sometimes I didn't even hear it and I would stop moving, but it would rise again and I would move again. Sometimes I thought of going back, but the sound, with all its horror, became the only sound I could hear. The only voice I knew. My memories came to my mind and disappeared. My home, my job, my family were no longer important to me. I had to reach the sound, the source of the sound. Hours and maybe days passed. I was hungry, I was tired. My hands and feet were sore and the wounds were infected and rotten. But I had to see the source of the sound with my own eyes. It was too late to go back. I didn't know how much time I had. I didn't know if I would die first from thirst and hunger, or from infection and wounds, or from lack of oxygen. Suddenly the pit became narrower and narrower until I could hardly move. In total darkness, I saw the light of a pair of eyes, level with my own. Whatever the creature was, it turned its head away from me and the sound of moaning stopped. I quickly reached into my pocket and took out a match and a knife. The matches were damp. 1 match, 2 matches, 3 matches, no matter what I tried, it wouldn't light. I took the last match and lit it. For a few seconds, we both held our breath. The match went out and I could not believe what my eyes had seen, like it was daylight. My head was filled with panic and my hands, feet, and tongue were locked. Facing me in the darkness was a creature with long, dirty hair and a rotting body. Behind his long and pus-covered hair, 2 familiar eyes were shining, and even with his face, which had pieces of skin torn off and the flesh beneath it visible, I recognized him instantly. His mouth does not move. There is no more sound. As if he had reached his goal. I quickly looked for the knife, but the pit became tighter and stuck my hands to my body. I realized with despair that there was nothing I could do, and a few moments before I fainted, I looked into the eyes of that familiar being, into my own eyes. When I regained consciousness, I was sitting at the bottom of a narrow pit. My hands did not move. I could not feel my legs. I was afraid that my body would disintegrate with the slightest movement. I opened my mouth to ask for help, but the only sound that came out of my mouth was an incomprehensible moan. A loud and ear-splitting moan. I was afraid of my own voice. I could see the flash of the knife in front of me, but I could not reach out to pick it up. All my thoughts had disappeared and my body and mind were trapped in the pit. I had no escape. I waited for a few hours, a few days, a few months, I don't know how long, and nothing happened. My hair and nails grew and my wounds rotted and decayed, but I survived. I was in pain. I realized that there was nothing I could do but moan.
But if I lay down and I play dead and I stay dead, maybe you'll get sick of being